Here is 66 CE. That's about 30-something years after Jesus walked the earth, CE being the Common Era. Roman oppression of Jews persists. Jerusalem becomes more and more the center of unrest. There's tension, conflict, there's uprisings against Romans. Zealots and revolutionaries push harder and harder against the occupiers until finally Rome does the unthinkable, and they destroy the temple in Jerusalem. And this drives the Jews, including all Christians who are Jews, into the countryside. For at that time, all Christians were Jews. Rome destroyed the seat of Jewish life. Religion, internal governance, banking, culture, identity, all centered around temple life. And by 70 in the Common Era, the city itself had been leveled. So Jews, which remember include all Christians, retreat into the smaller communities, and synagogues, which are houses of learning in the Jewish culture that dot the countryside, are where Jews and Christians gather together to learn and to worship. There's no conflict between them. Some Jews are waiting for the Messiah. Christian Jews believe the Messiah has come, and they are one people worshiping one God. It's right around this time that the gospel according to Mark is written and circulated. In the passage you're going to hear in just a moment, Jesus is in Jerusalem just days before his death, and he begins to speak about the temple. Kinsey, would you share that, please?
As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs. And as for yourselves, beware. For they will hand you over to the councils, and you will be beaten in the synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings because of me."
Now, do you notice in this passage, as you were reading along, that Jesus foresees the destruction of the temple and speaks of wars and rumors of wars and nations rising against each other and earthquakes and famine, hard times he is talking about. He tells them they're going to be beaten in the synagogues. That foreshadows that they move out to the countryside. And he tells them this is all necessary. This is the birth pangs. This is the beginning of something better. This allows them to hold on. Imagine, if you will, these sort of dark-sounding words bringing comfort to people who are in fact experiencing this stuff in real time. It makes a difference. So things are going to be better soon because Jesus has said it. We stick together. This is the start of something good. A message to Christians, yes, a message to all Jews in a way. Now, visit this same region a good 30 years later. Rome is still in charge of the region. Poverty and all that comes with it is still shaping the lives of all Jews. But one thing now has changed. The Christians have been expelled from those synagogues. A huge unfriendly rift has grown, and they're no longer welcome to join with other Jews in worship and learning. Christians are being persecuted and separated off. During this time comes from now the author of John's Gospel. We know from our learning last week that John writes a very, very different gospel, giving entirely different accounts from Jesus' life and quotes from Jesus' life. In his final days in Jerusalem, according to John's gospel, Jesus doesn't particularly lift up the temple being destroyed as important. He teaches the disciples at length over their last meal together about the idea that they must truly love one another, that now they have to be together and to share with one another. He does this perhaps because of the persecution that is being experienced as John is writing. Take a listen to one passage here.
If the world hates you, be aware that it hated me before it hated you. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. I have said these things to keep you from stumbling. They will put you out of the synagogues. Indeed, those who would kill you think that by doing so, they are offering worship to God. They do this because they have not known the Father or me. I tell you these things so that when this hour comes, you may remember that I told you about them.
Thank you, Kinsey. Are you catching the strength of the language here? This is exactly what is happening to Christians now in this time. They are being forced out of the synagogues. They're being persecuted by both Romans and fellow Jews. John's Jesus doesn't falter. You're going to be okay. You're with me. You're with me. The more we learn about the church at that time, the more we realize that their task in so many ways was to distinguish themselves now from the other Jews and to show also that they had it right. They were indeed special. They must band together exclusively. We'll see and talk more about this in coming weeks. But imagine what reading this, what hearing this would be like for them. Those Christians who've lost their historic connection to their faith. They band together in house churches. They form entirely separate and exclusive special communities. A community that holds the ultimate truth. So during those 60 to 80 years that we're talking about here, since Jesus walked the earth, a whole lot in the world hasn't changed at all. There's no major inventions. There's no outside forces shaping the lives of the poor people. Rome is still in power. Men still still have power in public life. Things are pretty much the same and pretty dark. The things that have changed are the two things we're talking about this morning. One, the temple's been destroyed. This changes everything for all Jews. Mark was written for them in that context. And the second thing that has changed years later is that Christians have been kicked out of the synagogue, which changes everything for Christians. John was written for them in their context. So how do we hear these Gospels in our context, our time and place? Because neither book was written for us in our context. I want us to take a few minutes and look at context. Now, Kinsey, how old are you?
17.
Okay, I need somebody who's 30 to 45. It's just going to be a real quick volunteer opportunity. Dawn, 30 to 45, come on up. I'll represent the next age group, and I need, hey, it's just kind of a zone. And then I need somebody up here who's 75 up to anything. An older person, older than 75, who'll just come up for a little bit. You full on no, we have people. Okay. We got a person right here. Come on up. Take microphones. I'm going to stand between you. Oh yeah, just a little talk, just a tiny bit. Okay, just a tiny bit of talk. Okay, so here we are in order by time. I'm just going to ask you a question about what it was like when you were a teenager. So you got to think back. Okay, so here's the deal. Okay, Kinsey, you're a teenager right now.
Yeah.
What are the fashion trends?
For girls, it's like scarves and stuff, and for boys, it's wearing Nike socks.
Scarves for girls, Nike socks for boys. Dawn, when you were a teenager, fashion.
We wore polo shirts with the collars turned up, 501 jeans, 2 pair of socks, scrunch socks, of course, one that matched the shirt, one that matched the pants, and white tennis shoes with the laces backwards.
Okay. In my time, we wore very short skirts, bell-bottom trousers, and Nehru jackets. Remember that? How about when you were a teenager, what were people wearing?
When I was a farm boy, I wore Levi's and Levi jackets and quite immature.
Okay, all right, there we go. Okay, next question is about television. What television programs are you watching right now?
I watch Glee and Saturday Night Live.
What's the first one?
Glee.
Glee and Saturday Night Live. What did you watch when you were a teenager?
Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. Cliff Huxtable. The
Cosby.
Cosby Show. We watched. Oh, I saw the first video on MTV when they showed videos, and we also watched Knight Rider.
Okay. For me, it was The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Laugh-In. Remember Laugh-In? Okay. TV when you were a teenager?
We didn't have one.
There wasn't. Okay, right. Important. Okay, let's go with, let's see, music. Who are you listening to right now?
Passenger, One Republic, and Imagine Dragons.
Passenger, One Republic, and
Imagine Dragons.
Imagine Dragons. What were you listening to as a teenager?
Journey, Duran Duran, and Madonna.
Okay, I was listening to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Beach Boys. What kind of music did you enjoy when you were a teenager?
Anything to do with cowboys.
Cowboys, especially because you were on the farm. And this generation, big bands, probably big bands also. Very cool. Okay, now, what war is shaping your life as a teenager?
I would say the Afghan War and the Syrian conflict.
Okay, the Afghan war and the Syrian conflict shaping your life. What war, if any, shaped your life as a teenager?
We didn't have a war. We had Farm Aid.
Okay.
And the Christmas song, We Are the World.
Okay. Okay, Vietnam, no question. My growing up was totally shaped by Vietnam. When you were a teenager, what war?
World War II.
World
Korea.
War II. And Korea. Okay, very different. Okay, and Kinsey, last question. How much time do you spend at church, and what does church mean to you?
I'd say about 2 hours a week, and usually at church it means to me like it's a place where I can be myself and just build my relationship with God.
Thank you. Okay, teenager, church?
None.
None. Okay, there you go. That's an interesting observation right there. For me, youth group, super important. I was one of those church kids. I spent lots of times with my friends. I was building relationships. I could be myself, and I was learning a lot about God. Did you go to church when you were a teenager?
Later, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Not at the beginning because my family weren't into that, but I found friends at school that
Friends
did.
at church. Lots of times, church is about, when you're a teenager, is about your friends. Very true. So that gives us, one more. Technology. Let me ask the technology question.
I'd say camera phones and Apple products.
Apple products and camera phones. What technology shaped your life?
Walkmans and the big, humongo box cell phones.
Oh,
They were huge.
Oh, yes, that's right. A cell phone was
You
big.
needed a backpack
Okay.
just for your phone.
At my time, the changes were the microwave oven. And I even hesitate to mention this one, but we went from rotary phones to push-button phones without cords. Okay, for you?
From horses to tractors and washing machines.
Yes, that came up in the first service too. Washing machines. We just take that so much for granted. Let's give these guys a hand. Thank you. In our past 60 to 80 years, representing about the same amount of time, the world around us has changed profoundly. And it keeps changing at a rate that I have to tell you, it makes my head spin. It makes me anxious sometimes. Things shift so quickly. I was asking lots of people about significant changes during their lifetime, and wow, I got to say, we barely touched on it. There's nuclear weapons and nuclear medicine. There's walking on the moon and space shuttles. There's the fall of communism, birth control, Starbucks. Think about it for a second. Human rights movements of all kinds, CDs, DVDs, VCRs, DVRs, and I'm sure there's more of those kinds of things out there. Air travel that we take so much for granted. And someone mentioned, I thought this was great, wheels on suitcases. If you think about all the ways in which constantly things are shifting, you might be trying to stand still in that shifting space, but even that impacts how you experience the world around you. In the midst of all that change, if I were to ask you this question, do you here living in the United States, while living in the United States, have you ever been persecuted for being Christian? Have you ever been persecuted for being Christian? I'm seeing a sea of no's. I would venture that probably nobody here has ever been persecuted for being Christian in our country. Reading the Bible is in some ways like reading other people's mail. We have to be careful. We have to understand about this word persecution, or we bring this message from John's gospel in particular into our lives, and it may not ring true. Persecution, as I would define it, is having your existence threatened simply because of who you are. Persecution is being singled out and treated as a lesser human being or less than human by people who can claim some kind of power over your life. It involves scapegoating. It involves hatred. It involves discrimination of all kinds. There are Christians in America who say they are persecuted. All you have to do is turn on your radio. And they say this because there are comedians and satirists who make fun of Christians, harsh fun of Christians. Our faith is spoken of with contempt. Christians say we don't hold the same power we did in the past in this Christian nation, and we do not have a part in the public sector that wields power simply because we are Christian. I got to tell you, that is not persecution. That is being a victim. And that is not healthy. And in some case, this message that comes at us from the media and from lots of different places, we are taking a hit out there. We deserve it. As a whole, Christianity's reputation deserves some of the critique it gets. Oh yes, there are places in this world where Christians are being persecuted, singled out, discriminated against, killed. Look in North Korea. Look many places in the Middle East. Look many places in Africa. It is happening, real life-threatening, horrifying, systematic persecution. These Christians, if they read Mark, if they read John, they hear that message from their context, and they take heart that there is something better at the end of the persecution that is happening to them, that God still has yet to say the last word around that kind of destruction. I know that all of us in this room recognize the difference between being disrespected and being persecuted. This is not a problem in this room. Somehow, many Christians, after 2,000 years, though, do manage to hold on to one idea from John. We're special. We're right. And we should be exclusive for that reason. Being special, being right, being exclusive are gifts from John's gospel, written for other people in another time and place, in an entirely different context. So I think about Mark, and I think even more especially about John, and I've given this some serious thought, and I think the only way we can overcome this reputation of being perceived as self-righteous and arrogant and exclusive is to be dead serious about addressing persecution and discrimination when we do find it in our context. And it is alive and well in our context, Illegal aliens and immigrants experience this, legal immigrants experience this in many ways. Our system is large and hard to wade through, and they're met with suspicion and irritation. They're treated as ignorant, sometimes less than human. GLBT people, gay, lesbian, transgendered people, often do fear in their lives because their basic rights in so many places in America, including the state of Idaho, they are not being protected. They are expelled from churches and housing and jobs because of who they are. GLBT folk have feared for their lives and their livelihoods in our country often. Muslims, and anybody who looks like they might be a Muslim, they also are treated with suspicion and contempt in so many settings. They too have their lives and their livelihoods threatened. Bullying that we hear about in schools and high school. This is another kind of honest-to-goodness persecution. It is alive and well in the world. Fear leads to hatred, to scapegoating, to discrimination, to downright persecution. If the love of God and the kingdom of God is actually for everybody, which is something we know, we say, and we trust, then our task from our much more comfortable, more privileged context is to make ourselves a little less comfortable. Mark and John emphasize so many different things in their Gospels that differ from each other, but both of them emphasize the importance of good news in people's lives. And the good news isn't just something we say, it's something we do. So it's acts of compassion. It is work for peace. It is work for justice. We have a reputation at Hillview for being that kind of church, but we have a lot still to live into. Some of us have yet to make ourselves uncomfortable, yet to take a stand about something or with someone. I would love for each and every one of us in coming months to do something that makes us uncomfortable. Say yes to one of those opportunities to get out of your comfort zone by maybe just sitting with people you don't know at the community meal, or calling your senator or your congressman or the White House about this war, whatever your perspective is, or writing to someone in prison, or volunteering in a school or a food bank or a shelter. Getting out of our comfort zone. When the temple fell back in 66, the people had to do things differently. I read that passage now and I hear Jesus saying, get out of the temple before it falls down, because if you don't get out there in the world, the church is going to be irrelevant. You have to do things differently. That, I think, is the message for our time from Mark. When Jews and Christians separated and that horrible rift occurred, everybody had to do things different, and that separation for Christians made them feel exclusive, special, and bonded with each other. I read John, and the message I get is the world is broken. It is torn apart with many rifts. People are separated by hate and fear. And you people are special because you know something about how to fix it. You know something about love, and you can bring one amazing constant into this unstable, ever-changing, crazy context we live in. We know about love, one stable truth. We can be that presence of love in this world as life goes on. Amen.